Hey guys! Welcome back to Makeup Tales. My name is Jacqueline. I typically post a weekly video on Tuesdays while I do my makeup, but I also want to bring you more scary content that I find throughout the week and I am passionate about. Along with my makeup and scary story videos, I will also post just scary story narrations. Disclaimer: the following story is intended for a mature audience. It may contain graphic depictions, death, gore, sexual themes, and adult language. Viewer discretion is advised. For this week's story, it was written by Reddit user MTP6921. Link to the story is in the description below. And here we go. When the Disney Cruise Line said they were going to set sail for a trial run with the CDC's permission and allow actual people to board the ship as guinea pigs to test their new infection control precautions, I made sure that my family booked a stateroom on the cruise. Disney clearly stated that this cruise will be atypical and won't include the typical shows or activities that prior cruise line patrons were accustomed to. After Disney's infection control plan was approved by the CDC, me, my wife, and daughter were so excited that we had our bags already packed to go for the cruise. In order for Disney to pass this test run, government observers from the CDC will be on the ship. The magic to see how well Disney can implement its infection control plan. In order for Disney to pass this test run, government observers from the CDC will be on the cruise ship, the Magic, to see how well Disney can implement its infection control plan. With suitcases in hand, me, my wife, Sarah, and our 12-year-old daughter all got on the plane to Orlando from Philadelphia. The plane ride wasn't that bad, where we knew ahead of time that we needed to wear our masks for the 2-hour flight. Sarah, being a nurse, was used to wearing a mask all day, so it didn't even bother her. Once we landed in Orlando, we took an Uber to Port Canaveral, as we typically would for our previous 6 Disney cruises. We arrived at the cruise port, and the terminal was much less crowded compared to past cruise trips, which was great. The 3 of us went right up to the counter where the representative took our pictures, and we filled out the typical paperwork. There was additional paperwork because we were considered guinea pigs, as far as this being an infection control test run. But Sarah paid little attention considering she was a nurse in one of Philadelphia's busiest hospitals, so she kind of knew what to expect. We finally got to board the Disney Magic, and we were so happy, but before we could get onto the Magic, we had to clean the wheels of our suitcases and the bottom of our sneakers, which we had no problem following Disney's enhanced protocols. Of course, we had to keep both our masks and our face shields on and use hand sanitizer before we could go to our stateroom. The 3 of us were just so happy to be on board Disney's Magic with its vibrant, colorful carpeting, the cool Disney decorations, and of course, the piped-in classical Disney music. We leisurely strolled to our usual economy 3rd-level deck stateroom, where the engine noise tends to be a bit louder, but we never had any issues sleeping through the noise. We were told to come out of our rooms in an hour for lunch at the Animator's Palette dining room, so we wasted no time unpacking our clothes for the 7-day cruise. The hour went by fast, and we wasted no time getting to our assigned dining room. As we walked to the dining room, We had to wash our hands in the sinks located outside of the dining room, with Disney and CDC staff watching us. We were overly precautious and probably washed our hands for over a minute versus the required 20 seconds, but that's what happens when you know you're being watched. We finally sat down inside the dining room, and there were no paper menus given to us to reduce cross-contamination from touching things, so we just scanned a barcode at the table via our cell phones. Our waiter was Javier from Puerto Rico, who was friendly but short on words to lessen the amount of exposure time with us. Grace and I ordered light entrees, which consisted of sandwiches, and Sarah ordered the special Disney salad. As we waited for our food, we noted that all the patrons were spread out throughout the dining room, and there were 2 CDC observers on opposite ends of the dining room. Also, as we were waiting for our lunch to be served, while sipping on our waters, 3 of us looked over at a young boy, probably around the age of 6, who was just seated a few tables over from us. He caught our attention because he couldn't stop coughing. His mother was trying to console him by rubbing his back, but he just couldn't stop coughing. I could tell the boy's dad was starting to get nervous as he was trying to motion to his wife to get the boy to stop. Not more than a minute later, one of the head dining room managers came over with a bunch of waiters behind him, as well as the CDC observers. I could overhear the manager say to the family at the table, "I'm sorry folks, you all have to gather your stuff from your stateroom and leave the ship." The parents pleaded with the manager, saying that the boy has allergies, and once the Allegra kicked in, his coughing symptoms would pass. By now, there were other Disney managerial staff in the dining room who were really being stern, and the one woman manager dressed in a white sailor's managerial outfit said, "You are now considered trespassing on Disney property, and we will call security to have you physically removed from this ship if you don't get up right now and go to your stateroom and gather your belongings and leave this ship." The husband, the wife, the 6-year-old boy, and their 8-year-old daughter, who was crying hysterically, did eventually get up from the table and left the dining room. I observed the CDC observers write something down on their clipboards, which I assumed was a positive infection control intervention for Disney by having the family removed from the ship. Watching that interaction was tense and wasn't something we ever seen before from the multiple Disney cruises we have taken. The 3 of us felt bad for the family, and I did have the momentary thought of maybe we should just get off the ship before it leaves. But the money we paid would be non-refundable, and I don't think my daughter would have been happy with that decision. Our lunch came, and Javier tried to cheer us up by seeing that family get booted from the ship was a bit heartbreaking. So we sadly just sat there and ate our lunch. After lunch, we were told to go back to our stateroom. The one good thing was that we didn't have to sit through that boring safety demonstration in case of an emergency, and we just watched it on our TVs instead, which none of us actually did. As we were sitting in our stateroom, I could hear and feel the ship start to sail away and figured Disney wasn't going to do their typical sailing off party. The good thing was that it was now Grace's time to go to the kids club, so I figured that I would walk her over rather than for her to go by herself, considering what we observed in the dining room. Both Grace and I were well versed in navigating our way around the cruise ship, considering the amount of times we have sailed already. It was nice to see the blue carpeting in the hallway outside our stateroom, and the shiny wood that adorned the walls of the hallway where the guest staterooms are located. We got to midship where the elevators are located, and we both decided to take the stairs, mostly for nostalgic sake, to see the artwork at each cabin level. As we got to deck 5, we saw a young boy who I'm guessing was around 11 years old, who was just moseying down the stairs while holding onto the handrail. Out of nowhere, one of the female managerial crew members dressed in the white sailor outfit said, "Excuse me, young man, where are you coming from?" in a real stern, harsh voice. The boy, who looked obviously upset by the woman's tone of voice, said, "I just came from deck 9. I wanted to see the ship sail away from the port." The same woman manager, who was accompanied by a CDC observer, had a real mean scowl on her face, like this boy had just beat up her kid. Said, "First of all, you weren't supposed to be on deck 9 unless it was your approved time slot, and no guest had an approved time slot to be on deck 9 today. But the real reason why I stopped you was because you're not supposed to be touching the handrails, and I observed you from all the way from deck 9 carrying germs down to here, which would be deck 5. Did you read our infection control rules before you came on the ship of no touching handrails unless it's an absolute emergency?" The boy was obviously flustered and shaken up and didn't know what to say, so he just uttered, "No, I'm sorry, I guess I didn't." The same woman manager said, "Well, then maybe you and your parents don't care about the safety of others, and maybe you don't belong on this cruise ship." I'm not sure what she meant by that statement, considering we were already sailing in the middle of the ocean, but we observed the Disney cruise manager and the CDC observer follow the boy back to his stateroom. Grace was expectedly visibly shaken up after watching that encounter. I asked her if she wanted to continue going to the kids' club or go back to the stateroom, and she kind of hesitated, like she wasn't sure for a few minutes. I bargained with her and told her that I would wait outside of the kids' club, and if she got bored or felt anxious, then she could just leave and we would both walk back together. Grace agreed and nervously walked into the kids' club, where she had to first vigorously wash her hands while a CDC observer watched her. After 2 minutes, I actually spoke up and said something to the effect that, "You washed your hands long enough, Grace. Go inside now." The kids' club is an open environment where parents could see and hear most things that are occurring inside the club from the hallway. During the previous cruises we had taken, there was non-stop games and entertainment for the kids, which was one of the biggest reasons why Grace likes the Disney cruises. But for this cruise, I noticed the kids were spread out in tables across the large kids' club room, and there were 2 young female Disney Cruise Club employees who were of the high energy type that were asking the kids questions while the CDC observers watched over the activity. The one Disney employee asked, "How long do we wash our hands for?" One of the kids raised their hands and the employee said, "Okay, Liam, do you know the answer?" Liam responded, "For 20 seconds. The Disney employee got all excited and said, "That's right, Liam!" Then the same employee asked, "What's a good alternative to washing our hands if there is no soap and water available and our hands aren't visibly soiled?" A young girl raised her hand and the same employee said, "Okay, Katie, do you know the answer?" The little girl responded, "How about an alcohol-based hand foam rub?" The same employee got all excited and said, "That's right, Katie! We would use an alcohol-based product as long as our hands weren't visibly soiled." These infection control questions just went on and on to the point where I expected these kids weren't going to be doing anything else but answering these questions. I could see Grace from a distance, and I could tell through her face shield and mask that she was bored, and this was not the type of fun she was expecting. I think she felt too awkward to just get up and leave, so she just sat there. So infection control after mundane infection control questions were asked until I heard a real odd question that was asked to the kids by the same high energy employee. "So guys, what would you do if you saw your parents not following proper safe infection control practices on this cruise ship?" I thought to myself, what the hell kind of question is that? As I saw a bunch of kids raise their hands. The employee pointed at a girl and said, "Jocelyn, what would you do?" Jocelyn responded, "I would tell them to stop because they're putting everyone's health and safety at risk." The same high energy employee said, "That's right, good answer, but does anyone have a better answer?" Then she pointed at a boy and said, "Okay, Connor, what would you do if you saw your parents not following safe infection control practices?" Connor replied, "I would tell a Disney cruise employee." The same high-energy employee said, "That's the right answer, Connor. Tell a Disney cruise employee right away." I said to myself, what the fuck, is this the Gestapo? Luckily, Grace got really bored and got up and made her way towards me. Grace said, "Dad, that wasn't fun at all." I said, "I know, honey, I'm sorry." I didn't even want to tell her that it would get better because I didn't know for a fact that it would get any better. We both went back to our stateroom, careful not to touch anything along the way. Our next activity was dinner in the same dining room at Animator's Palette, where, truth be told, I was a little nervous attending with the Disney cruise staff, aka the Gestapo, always watching over us. Dinner came and we washed our hands and were scared enough not to remove our face shields or masks without being served our beverages first. The dinner service was nothing compared to the previous sailings, where there were no Disney characters that showed up, and if anything, I would say the dining service was quite bland compared to what we were accustomed to in the past. The dining room was even more empty than compared to lunch, which struck me as being odd because the same guests eat at the same dining rooms for each of the meals. My wife, Sarah, and I were speculating that perhaps even more people were thrown off the ship besides the family of 4, but we had no idea how because the ship was already moving. We ate our dinner, which was uncomfortable because we had the CDC observers constantly watching over us, and I was petrified that one of us might get caught up in a coughing spell, but none of us did, and we all retired to our stateroom. We were a little bummed out because there wasn't going to be any award-winning Disney Broadway live shows that we were used to seeing after dinner, but we knew that before we booked this cruise. We all got ready for bed, and I had to tidy up our stateroom because there was no housekeeping service, which was always a signature of the Disney cruises, but once again, oh well. I thought as we should just be happy that we got to go on the cruise. As I was straightening up our sneakers by the hallway door, I heard some commotion out in the hallway. So I opened our stateroom door, and I was shocked when I saw the maintenance crew, who was doubled as the security crew, who were holding nightsticks and kind of shoving this young Asian American family down the hallway. I could hear the father saying, "Don't touch my kids," as the Disney security guards acted as bulldozers and continually manhandled the family down the hallway. There were 4 kids, and none of them were older than 8 years old. Grace said, "Dad, what's going on?" as she heard the commotion in the hallway, and I responded, "Nothing, honey, just please get ready for bed." I was still looking out in the hallway, and the security guards were still manhandling the family down the opposite end of the ship, where I saw the father stop and point his finger in one of the security personnel's faces. And the same security guard whacked the father in the head with a fold-out nightstick. The father kind of fell sideways onto the wall, and one of the security guards prevented the father from falling, then pushed the father along. The little kids were uncontrollably crying, and the mother tried to soothe them by saying, "Just keep walking." I felt like a real coward, but there was like 8 of those security/maintenance guys, and they would have just beaten me up. I am now definitely afraid to be on this ship, and I have no idea where that family was taken or if they're safe. We are somewhere in the middle of the Caribbean, sailing on the Atlantic Ocean, so I have no idea what international laws are in effect. I'm hesitant to tell Sarah or Grace what I just observed because I don't want to terrify them. I really don't want to leave this room anymore either, but This sailing offers no room service, and we brought no food. I go to bed thinking that I have no idea what to do. I don't even think these are real Disney employees and just some hired mercenaries that are doing whatever it takes to get a passing grade from the CDC in order to start regular sailings again. So I just laid in bed all night and only got about half hour's worth of sleep. We were allowed to go on deck 9 for a half hour in the morning, so not to disappoint Grace, the three of us went. I started to look like a crack user with my anxiety being off the charts, and because I haven't really slept at all. Before we left our stateroom, I advised all of us not to touch a single thing unless we absolutely have to, and for us just to keep our heads down. We left our stateroom and I proceeded towards the elevators. This time I wanted nothing to do with the stairs, considering the previous incident with the young boy touching the handrails. We actually passed by a Disney cruise employee walking with a CDC observer, where my heart was beating like 1,000 beats per minute. Luckily, the two of them didn't say anything to us and we made it to the elevator. My daughter Grace said, "Dad, do you remember how the Disney staff used to say hi to us when we walked down the hallway?" I said, "I know, honey," as I quickly looked around in a paranoid state to make sure none of the Disney staff heard my daughter's comment. We got on the elevator, which brought us up to the 9th deck. Grace was a little sad because this was the deck where all the pools are located, which were completely void of water for this sailing. The warm Caribbean weather was really nice, but it felt like we were in a prison courtyard because there were multiple eyes watching us at all times. At one point, the ship got a little unsteady from the turbulent waters and my daughter reached for the safety bar, where I basically swatted her hands down and made her grab my arm. After about 10 minutes, we decided to leave the deck because of the uncomfortableness of being watched in all directions, and we headed down to breakfast. This time, breakfast was at the Rapunzel's Royal Table dining room, and we waited for our turn to wash our hands before entering the dining room. There was a family of 5 in front of us, and I could tell they were from New York City just based on their demeanor and their attitudes. As the same family finished washing their hands and proceeded to go into the dining room, one of the male dining room employees said, "Excuse me, sir. You didn't lather your hands with soap correctly while you were washing your hands." The male guest, with his thick New York accent, in a pissed-off tone said, "I didn't do what?" The same employee, with a CDC observer standing right next to him, stated, "Sir, you lathered your hands with soap under running water, where the water washed away the soap before you could properly lather your hands." The same irate New York City guest said, "I didn't fucking lather my hands properly with soap because of the water? Go fuck yourselves." The same male Disney employee said, "I'm going to need you and your family to wash your hands again." The New York City guest then looked at the Disney employee in the eyes while pointing his right index finger and said in a really vulgar tone, "We ain't doing shit. Go fuck yourselves." The Disney employee then instructed someone else to call security. As soon as I heard that, I said to my wife and daughter, "Come on guys, let's wash our hands so we can go into the dining room." My wife, being a nurse, knew what the Disney employee was talking about, so she showed us how to lather our hands with soap away from the running water. Then I wanted us to get away from the drama that was about to occur with the New York family and the security staff. We were seated at our table, and I'm not sure if I ever felt this nervous and disjointed in my whole life. I could tell there was no happiness coming from my wife or daughter either, as they just sat there and looked over the breakfast menu on their phones. The dining room really didn't have more than 10 families, including ours, as this was starting to feel like some type of survivor mission with people being constantly eliminated. This dining room could easily hold up to 250 people, so it really looked empty. Javier greeted us and then took our orders. We sat there for a few moments, waiting for our meals to arrive when things outside in the hallway really started to heat up. I could hear the man from New York yell out, "Get the fuck away from me!" Then, without being able to see anything, it sounded like a complete and utter mayhem outside the dining room. The doors were shut, so we couldn't see anything, but between bodies being thrown up against the dining room doors and the sounds of "I'm going to fucking kill you" echoing throughout the dining room, I knew there was a complete no prisoner mentality war occurring on this Disney cruise ship. I turned to my wife and said, "Do you think I should go out there and do something?" At this point, she was crying and she said, "No, don't get involved. What this cruise ship is doing isn't right, but they should have just washed their hands again." Javier brought our breakfast out and tried to distract our daughter, who was visibly shaking because of the violent melee that continued outside in the hallway with the loud banging and the cursing. When Javier went away, I said, "Everyone, try to eat as much as possible, and we will just try to stay in our stateroom as much as possible for the remainder of the trip." Both Grace and Sarah were crying, but shook their heads in agreement. We tried to eat, but it was difficult because we knew that guy from New York was getting the crap beaten out of him. You could just tell because his yells turned into more of whimpers, and then the outside dining room hallway got completely silent, and you knew the violence had ended. None of us wanted to eat, but we didn't want to starve in our stateroom, so we did our best to consume as much as possible. We were finished eating, and then we were escorted through a side exit of the dining room. I have no idea what happened to that man or his family, and we just retired back to our stateroom. Our stateroom was near torture because we didn't have internet service, and the on-demand offerings was awful, so Grace just continually watched her kids' shows for the duration of the cruise. We essentially starved ourselves and only came out for 2 more dinners, where we just followed whatever they wanted us to do and ran back to our stateroom. The last night of the cruise, Grace had a coughing fit in our stateroom and someone knocked on our door, where I just covered Grace's mouth with a pillow until the knocking went away. And fortunately, Grace's coughing subsided. This was the first Disney cruise where we couldn't wait to get off the ship as quickly as possible. We just gathered our stuff and put our heads down and left the cruise ship. I almost kissed the port of Cape Canaveral because I was that happy we survived. We were all given an anonymous comment card by the CDC as we left the ship, but I was a little suspect because I noted the CDC employee jot down something on his clipboard after handing out each comment card. And I also noticed 9 random numbers on the bottom of the comment card that made me suspicious of the cards not being anonymous. I hope you enjoyed this week's narration. The link for the story is in the description below. Also, along with the link to all my socials and my email if you guys have a story you would like me to narrate. And remember, stay spooky and stay glamorous. And I will catch you guys next time.